Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of What the Fantasy Football Show. Tonight, I am your host, Jim Day. I am joined by Mr. Mike Blewett of FNTSY Sports Radio. Mike, how you doing tonight?
What's going on, Jim? Obviously, creeping closer to the start of the NFL season. We got Scott Fishbowl. You and I both completed our Scott Fishbowl draft, so excited to kind of get through those teams and find out what the latest news is, obviously, around the NFL.
Absolutely. And, of course, sorry, folks, but no Tony tonight. We're not exactly sure where he is. Last we heard, he was somewhere in Turkey. Hopefully, he'll be back sometime soon if he's not caught up in some kind of sex slave type of thing. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a guessing game with Tony.
Everything is a guessing game with Tony. That's why I love working with him. You just never know where he's going to go off the rails. So, unfortunately, he won't be here to join us tonight. So, let's jump right into some news. Of course, the big news of today was the Atlanta Falcons going out and signing middle linebacker Deion Jones to a 4-year, $57 million contract extension. What's your thoughts on this? Good move, smart move, bad move? What's your thoughts?
I like it just because I think for two reasons. A, the reason the Falcons fell apart last year, and keep in mind they had a really miserable season, still went 7-9. And the main reason for that, as you and I have discussed in the past, is that they had massive injuries to their defense in the first month of the season. Keanu Neal, Deion Jones was lost. I believe he missed 10 games, and they also lost Ricardo Allen. So they couldn't even really field a defense that was where they were expected to be at any point during the season. They still went 7-9. Obviously, the offense still has a lot of firepower there. Ridley added to the team last year. They lose Tevin Coleman during the offseason, but Ito Smith will take on a different role. But where I really see strides being made is defensively. Within a 48-hour span, Jim, they signed Grady Jarrett and Deion Jones to long-term extensions. So this is a team that has put their money where their mouth is as far as making a run at an NFC championship. So I like it. I think he's slightly below market value for the type of player that he is, but he's got some guaranteed money, and he's a happy player moving forward.
Yeah, $25.8 million of guaranteed money. So I get you there. And you're right. Look, they only get a few more years of Matt Ryan. They probably only get a few more years of Julio Jones. They got to try and make their run again while they can. And hopefully it won't be a repeat of the last one when they got there. So let's keep moving. Some more news. People automatically started hearing early on from people when this came out that Emmanuel Sanders, they were going to take it slow with him going into training camp. And people were asking, do we have to worry about him? Is he not going to be ready? I got to say this. I'm not worried about him. I've seen a couple of clips of him running around, seen him cutting on both sides with no problem. I think he's going to be fine. It's only smart that they slow him down into training camp. Probably won't see him a ton in preseason either. There's really no need. He knows his offense. The only downside is that he's not really on the field with the new quarterback, but they can work off on the sideline to that to get some kind of rapport going. But there's really no reason nowadays when you have a vet like Sanders coming off a bad injury like an Achilles to even try and rush him on the field for either training camp or preseason. But I think based on what I've seen so far in the videos, I think he's going to be absolutely ready for week one. What's your thoughts on Emmanuel Sanders?
In general, I agree with your premise about not needing to see him. I don't think there's many guys, if I'm running an NFL team, that are that valuable to an offense that I would ever have on the field during the preseason. I don't think it's necessary. I think you're gaining enough reps with those players in practice. Frankly, as far as Sanders is concerned, if he's there for any length of time, it's probably better that he's working with Locke than Flacco anyway. But in terms of Sanders, the tricky part is that obviously they're going to be motivated on some level to work the younger players in Hamilton and Sutton. But considering where we're talking about him in drafts, I think he's well worth whatever quote-unquote risk you would put on him. I think he's a very talented player. I think he's proven to be very productive on two different teams in multiple offenses. And I think bringing him back, I think having him on your fantasy team, the value is so low where he's going in drafts that I think it's worth taking a shot on. But I don't know where you slot him in versus those younger wide receivers. Do you think he's the dominant wide receiver again amongst all of them?
I do, for several reasons. First of all, I just think he's better wide receiver at this point. I like Deshaun Hamilton, but he's not going to play a ton over Sanders unless Sanders has a setback or something along that line. And Sutton will grow into that role. But the one thing we saw last year is that he wasn't quite ready to be a number one receiver in this league yet. And
Yeah.
let's face it, most rookie wide receivers aren't. He just got thrown into the fire and he had to do what he had to do. But with Sanders, I mean, right now, the FFWC, the high stakes leagues, he has an ADP of 124 as the 55th wide receiver off the board. So for me, that represents absolutely nothing but value. You know, he's going after guys like Tyrell Williams, Michael Gallup, Anthony Miller. You know, those guys have a little bit of upside. I just think Sanders has more.
Yeah, and you're seeing Sutton go in front of him in a lot of drafts and Hamilton behind him. So I think a lot of people are really still trying to figure it out with the Broncos receivers. Considering their quarterback play and everything else, what I expect to be not great quarterback play, I'd rather just bet on the veteran wide receiver that can make the most of it given whatever situation he's in.
Yeah, well, you know what they say. There's no elite in Flacco.
there is not. No, I think this passing offense is going to have a tough time in general. So I don't know that Emmanuel Sanders' upside is anywhere near where it used to be. Obviously, it won't be. But again, given where he's being picked, he said 55th wide receiver. You can do the math. You're looking at your fifth, in some cases, your sixth wide receiver. I think you're okay to take that risk, and he's the veteran.
Yeah, at that point, I really don't even feel that's any kind of a risk.
Yeah.
You're not paying any draft capital for him whatsoever at that point.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm all in on that. Here's another bit of interesting news. And everybody who knows me, who's been listening to me for years, knows I love Gronkowski. I always have from the time he came out of college. I've been on him like, well, we won't even say like what, but like that, yes. I thought this kid was amazing coming out of college. He proved to have an amazing career, although short by most standards. But there is talk now all of a sudden that there's people close to him that say there's a 40% chance that he tries to come back and play this year. And he has been seen throwing the ball around with Tom Brady. Now, before we get into the likelihood of that happening, man, I got to tell you, knowing Belichick the way he is and the way he's always trying to play chess when other people are playing checkers, wouldn't that be the most perfect setup in the world? Getting teams to have to worry about Gronkowski again, even though he knows he may not come back?
Yeah, I mean, of course. Why not just lean into those rumors a little bit and keep people off balance? I've always thought there'd be a chance, like if Brady gave Gronk a call in October and was like, you know, we're struggling a little bit, and Dorsett and Thomas are not pulling their weight, and Ben Watson is suspended, and Matt Lacoste isn't doing anything for us. Would he do it for friendship? Maybe. I just don't know that Gronk would have gone through the whole song and dance of an actual retirement to get to this point 6 months later where he wants to do it again. I think he could have just taken some time, had these talks with the Patriots, and then gotten closer to training camp before he walked away. But he seemed pretty committed to it. Remember, there was talk even before that last season, which resulted in yet another Super Bowl for him, that he might walk. So I do think it's final, but I leave the door open, certainly. 40% sounds high to me. But, you know, we're arguing between 20 and 40%. If those sources say it's 40%, so be it.
Now, I got to ask, would you take a shot on him in any kind of league, in any kind of draft at any time?
I thought about taking a shot on him in Scott Fish Bowl just because it's 22 rounds and why not? But right now, I'll let somebody else take that chance and waste a roster spot for a month before they realize it's not happening.
Funny you say that because I was actually thinking about grabbing him in the Scott Fish Bowl, and then he got taken the round I was thinking about him by Dave Richard from CBS Fantasy. Took a shot on him in the 19th round. I was actually looking at it, having him in exactly that round.
I'll
so
tell
I waited
you where
just a little bit too long.
It's funny you said that because he went exactly in the 19th round with us too, Ryan McGinley from Bootleg Fantasy. So yeah, middle of the 19th round. I think at that point, most people had their depth charts set. So what does it matter if you grab another tight end that's not necessarily going to play? I mean, if Gronk did come back, he's probably missing as many games as Kareem Hunt will miss.
Yeah, right. We got to worry about that as well. But look, I've always liked the guy. I thought
Kareem Hunt went a lot higher than that, though. You know, it's
yeah. There's a lot of people buying into the second half season. Kareem Hunt coming in and taking over, and I don't really believe that. I think they could definitely lessen Chubb's rushes at that point, but I don't think Hunt's going to take over. They love Chubb.
That owner in that league, Ryan McGinley, his tight ends were Eric Ebron, Noah Fant. Then he took Gronk, and then he took Ben Watson in the last round. So he's got like the Patriots tight end situation kind of sort of locked up, even though both of those guys won't be there, at least for the first month. So I can appreciate why he did that.
It's the kind of league where you have to take chances. There's no doubt about it. Nothing falls the way you think it's going to fall. And that's why I was trying to tell everybody before the draft actually started that all these people were doing mock drafts. And, I tried to explain to them that the mock drafts that they were doing were basically useless because they never mirror what the true drafts look like. I set up a ton of Scott Fishbowl mock drafts last year for Scott himself, and we had a bunch of people in them, and not a single one of them looked like an actual Scott Fishbowl draft when it actually happened.
Why? Why do you think that was?
Most of the time in the mocks, people still tend to wait longer on quarterbacks. It's almost gotten to be like it's a dare when you're drafting now. Who's going to be the one to take that, those first couple of quarterbacks? I dare you to. But,
Sure.
In the Scott Fishbowl, when you actually get into it and you realize that people are going to start taking them early when you see Mahomes come off the board in the first, then that really changes it up. And none of the mocks look like that.
The actual fishbowl drafts are pretty wild. They range pretty dramatically, but you just have to kind of be on your toes because you're not really sure from year to year what's going to happen, as opposed to you and I playing in some of our annual leagues or your home leagues where you're going back to the well. You get a sense of how people react and they wait on quarterbacks or they don't. Or in this league, I'm probably going to have to get a second quarterback because that's what people do in this league. But in Scott Fishbowl, you're with 11 new people every year. You have no idea how they draft. And given the rule set changing slightly from year over year, you just have to be ready for whatever occurs in the first round.
Yeah, no doubt. This was absolutely the weirdest draft I've had all season, no doubt. It threw me quite a few places. Scott Bischoff from Football Guys, who I had the 11th pick. He had the 12-1 on the turn. And, man, he just kept – it was almost like he was reading my mind what I was thinking. So as I realized he was doing this through the first 5-6 rounds, after that I really had to start taking into account what he had, what I would think that he would take next, and work my way around that because he definitely did that a lot to me early in the draft. And then we had a fan that was before me at the 10th pick, Paul Berman, who actually did a pretty good job and took quite a few of the players I was looking at as well. So, really had to wind my way through a lot of different strategies as the draft went on, which, we knew would happen because these drafts are always different because of the league setup. I like it that way. I like drafts that are different, looks like nothing else you ever drafted. And that's what this one looked like.
Yeah, quarterbacks seem to have gone furiously in your draft, so we can get into it whenever you want.
When you're looking at either of the turns, whether it be the 1-2 pick or the 11-12 pick, the one thing you really have to be concerned about in something like this is a quarterback run and you not being ready for it. It could absolutely devastate you to where you're looking at, a couple of very, very late QB2s as your starters in these leagues if you don't react quick enough. And sometimes you have to try and be a little bit ahead of it. I ended up getting my third quarterback before most people, but I waited a little bit on my first one when I got Ryan in the third round. By that time, there had already been 5 quarterbacks in that round before my pick. So I almost had to take one there.
Yeah. Seeing your draft, you ended up, your first quarterback was the 11th one taken. My first quarterback was the 12th one taken. So mine was Phil Rivers. The other guys that I wanted in that range, I just liked him a little bit more. I could have gone with Kyler Murray or Cam Newton or even Jared Goff for some offensive upside. But just where the Chargers are at this year, I felt comfortable with Rivers being my number one in that league. But to your point, I similar to you, I wanted to make sure I had that third guy. So I was one of the first people with my third QB, which ended up being Marcus Mariota. And maybe there's not a ton of upside there, but I wanted somebody that I think could be a starter. And I backed him up, frankly, with Ryan Tannehill in the 22nd round, just in case anything happens to Mariota during the preseason, which, frankly, given his injury history, it could.
Yeah, no, I get that. And you definitely have a soft spot for that Tennessee team.
I do.
We heard that all last year.
I do. I do.
So, hey, you got to work.
How many times was Ryan Tannehill picked in the 100 drafts, Jim? Can't be many.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Not many at all. Most people aren't expecting that. I ended up going with, I had Ryan as my first quarterback in the third, and then I grabbed Roethlisberger as my second in the sixth, the 15th quarterback off the board. And then in the seventh, I grabbed my third, which was David Carr, as the 23rd quarterback off the draft. That's through 7 rounds. So just to give people an idea how fast they were coming off the board. And, I didn't really feel bad with Carr as my number 3. I think with Brown there, look, he threw for 4,000 yards with a ragtag group of receivers last year, Jared Cook being his top receiver. With Antonio Brown there and Tyrell Williams, I got to expect his numbers to go up a little bit. And I definitely expect the touchdown numbers to go up a little bit as well. So I don't mind having him as my number 3. I don't really think there's any kind of competition for his job. He ain't going nowhere this year.
Yeah, our 23rd quarterback went in the 8th round. So really just a few picks after yours. That was Jimmy Garoppolo in our league. I backed up Phil Rivers with Mitch Trubisky, who I'll be honest in saying he isn't my favorite guy from a talent standpoint. But I do think that Trubisky's upside in that offense is unique. You know what I mean? It's a potential. He had 24 touchdowns last year, a potential to push it up to 30 touchdowns. I feel like Rivers will be in the above the 30 touchdown mark. So pairing those guys together, you'd probably set the over-under at 58, 59 touchdowns. I think I like the over there. So I think there's strong possibility for Trubisky to improve upon his 2018 season, even if you don't like him specifically as an elite quarterback.
Are you at an airport?
I am in the midst of a unbelievable thunderstorm right now in Manhattan.
Oh, yeah. It's just starting to come down here, too, as well in Jersey.
Yeah, all kinds of alerts going off on my phones,
exactly.
flash flood warnings. So I'm sorry if it's ruining the
audio.
audio.
No, that's okay. It's fun.
It gives a nice ominous feel to
really.
this week's WTF podcast.
So we were in the draft. That was the fastest draft. We finished first out of all of them. And that was kind of the intention when we went in, because when Scott was first setting them up, when he sent out the invites, Dave Richard from CBS had posted a thing on Twitter saying, "Oh man, I'm so tired of these slow drafts. I want to have a draft where we can put all the fast people in one draft. Everybody who wants to draft with us can get in, and as long as they're going to be fast drafters." And it worked out to be the case. Unfortunately for Dave, he was the slowest drafter of the whole bunch. So I don't really like to rub that in, Dave, but I have to rub it in a little bit, buddy.
How long did it take?
The whole draft itself? Man, hold on. Let me find out. I forgot. But we were done pretty quick.
We just finished today, so 9 days.
We were finished last Wednesday at 1:22. Last Wednesday, yeah. So it took us. No.
Sorry. Yeah. What's today's date? Yeah, it started July 8th.
Wait, no, I'm looking at the wrong one. What am I looking? Oh, I'm looking at See, I hate that. I was looking at the Pac-Man one. I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense. No, we finished on July 12th, last Friday.
That's still pretty amazing.
That's
we were 4 days.
Good. We had 5 drafters under 5 minutes a pick. So, that average wait time. And of course, Dave was the only one who was over an hour. He had an hour and 6 minutes.
So for the record, Scott confirmed just earlier today or yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Only 3 drafts in the history of Scott Fishbowl have taken over 2 weeks, and I was in 2 of them. So my first 2 years in Scott Fishbowl, both of my drafts took over 2 weeks. I was just sort of accustomed to thinking that's how long they took. But this year, luckily, I'm in and out in 9 days, and it feels like it flew by.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I loved the fast start, and then I'm like, wait, slow down. I want to make it last a little, but they didn't slow down. And they kept going and kept going. So, yeah, we went right through it. So let's break down. Let's talk about your team a little bit for the folks. Let's go through that a little bit. We talked about quarterbacks already. You had Phillip Rivers, Trubisky, Mariota, and Tannehill.
Yeah, hey, look, in the 5th, 8th, and 9th round.
I'd like it a little bit more if it was a best ball. But, Rivers and Trubisky should be fine most weeks. Trubisky, he's going to have some up and downs, but a lot of guys do that. He's still young. He's getting better. Yeah. Hopefully that'll be there. Your running backs, like me, you're like my team, your running backs are probably your weakest link.
I would say so.
Yeah. You got guys there that have a chance to do something if it comes together. But Darius Geis and Derrick Henry would probably be your top 2 if Geis gets healthy and on the field. After that, you got Ito Smith, Jamal Williams, Austin Ekeler, Gus Edwards, Chase Edmonds.
So here's my issue with my squad. Obviously, a player or two gets hurt, a starting running back or two gets hurt, I'm in good shape. If Gordon holds out, if Devonta Freeman goes down, if Aaron Jones goes down, I've got some opportunities there. I think Gus Edwards, I got him really late, so it's untold what his role will be. My real issue with my running backs is this league rewards you for the dynamic play of your running backs. The only guy I have that's really dynamic is Ekeler, because Geis and Henry. Now, Geis is sort of an unknown, right? Maybe he'll be a bit of a pass catcher, but they have a pass catching back in Chris Thompson. How much does he share the ball? I need Geis to be a workhorse back. And if he catches passes, then the strategy worked out. I took Derrick Henry where I took him because at that point, I didn't love what was coming after. Now, I picked at the turn. I went Ertz in the first round, Julio, T.Y. Hilton, and then that was my decision. Do I take the running back now, or I just keep loading up at wide receiver? I could have taken A.J. Green there, or Brandon Cooks, or somebody like that, or even maybe drafted my first quarterback. But I went Derrick Henry because the next guys I saw were Aaron Jones. Entirely possible I could have gone that route. Then Leonard Fournette, Devonta Freeman, Mark Ingram, Kenyon Drake, Sony Michel. Those were the next guys that were going. And I think there's an opportunity for Henry to outtouch most of those guys without the relative injury history that somebody like Fournette has.
Oh, plus he's a Titan.
Yeah. I favor the Titans for some unknown reason. I don't root for them, and I don't particularly like them. I just bet on them to be better than they are every year.
Well, it worked out for you last year, didn't they?
They did go over, but I also had them in the Super Bowl. So
that didn't quite.
I didn't quite reach my highest heights, but they won 9 games. They went over. I think I'll probably lay off them this year because every game with them is a sweat, and they barely got to the 9 wins, and they play in 1-score games constantly.
To be honest, I'm totally surprised they even got to 9 wins. With the way Mariota was beat up last year, the receivers weren't really stepping up. So, yeah, I was really surprised they got there. When a team is all beat up like that and all the pieces aren't really working, and yet the team is still winning,
that's exactly right. That's where
good
I'm coming.
Coaching. I think
that's right. I think they have a good coaching staff. I think they have a talented team. That was a real failure of a season last year for them, and they went 9-7 and lost to the Colts in Week 17. And they missed a 2-point conversion in London when they went on the last play of the game against the Chargers. And they lost on a last-second field goal to the Bills. There were just a lot of games. I know you could swing the other way and say they won some tight ones too, but I just thought it belied them being a better team than their record showed.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's definitely something that, most people aren't really thinking about, but that's obviously the case. And you can say the same thing about Washington. I'm not a big Washington fan. But the fact that late in the season, they were still in a playoff hunt with all of the injuries they had. They were using a 4th-string quarterback at that point. All the wide receivers were hurt. The offensive line was hurt. Adrian Peterson was their top back and gets 1,000 yards on that ragtag team. Yet this team, coming down to Week 16, they're still, have a chance at a backdoor into the playoffs. So, that's good quality coaching, folks. You got to take that into account.
By the way,
by being lucky
for them this year, if they can get this Trent Williams situation sorted out, and their receivers, along with a rookie quarterback, show some semblance of improving. I don't have a lot of expectations for Doxson, but if Richardson and McLaurin as a rookie can be reliable, and maybe they get something out of Doxson, I don't know that I'm bullish on Washington. But I think when you look at their roster up and down, particularly defensively, I think this is a more talented team than people recognize. They have this cloud hanging over their head, obviously, with the Alex Smith thing, but they've already sorted that out. They have a quarterback for the future. You look up and down that roster, especially defensively, I think it's a good team. I just think they're going to give the Eagles and Dallas tough games. And I think they have an opportunity to be better than people expect.
No, and I'm right there with you. And I think Geis will have a lot to do with it if he can get back and get healthy on the field. But if not, then, Peterson is the guy that if you're grabbing Peterson now could be a huge steal for you in fantasy. Yeah. And I've been grabbing him a lot later on in drafts because he's still going so fairly late. People aren't really buying into it. Look, I'm not betting against Geis getting there, but you got to worry about this trend of the guys coming back from these ACL tears and then getting the soft tissue injuries like the hamstrings. We saw it last year with
he's had
Dalvin
multiple
Cook.
surgeries too, Jim.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Infections and everything else.
Yeah, right. There were a couple of setbacks. So you definitely have to be a little concerned. So I think, Peterson, if you're grabbing Peterson, I think that's a smart move right now. It may not work if Geis comes back and is healthy and starts from week 1, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. I could see him absolutely getting that role as the year rolls on.
Yeah.
But I think Adrian Peterson is going to be the guy that starts it out for them going forward.
I just think ultimately they're an interesting wild card team. And going back to my team, look, the strength of my team is that starting wide receiver core, and I started out with Ertz. So it's Julio, T.Y. Hilton, Cooper Kupp, who I got really late, last pick of the 7th round. Nice. Larry Fitzgerald is my 4th wide receiver. And then I backed him up with a couple of young guys in James Washington and Paris Campbell, who could be zeros, but their upside can be tremendous just given the quarterbacks that they play with and the offenses that they play in. If Washington ends up winning that job opposite Juju Smith-Schuster, that's a lot of catches. And if he displaces Moncrief. As far as Paris Campbell is concerned, I don't have expectations of a rookie, but when I draft somebody in the 15th round, the last pick of the 15th round, I feel like if he earns a role in the Colts offense as a possession wide receiver, and he's a guy that has a ton of speed, I think that could be a really interesting role. I drafted him in dynasty leagues as a wide receiver of the future, and I'm willing to take a shot in a league like this as a redraft.
I'll tell you the truth. I actually like your pick of DeMarcus Robinson, too. Let's say Tyreek Hill is suspended for 8 or more games. We really just don't know at this point. We absolutely don't. Sure. I'm still expecting him to get it when all is said and done, a 2-game suspension. I think they give him a 4. I think he appeals it. I think he gets it down to 2. But we just don't know. When it comes to suspensions and Roger Goodell, everything goes out the window. We just don't know what they're going to do. But if he does miss that much time, I know everybody's really high on McCole Hardman because he's fast. I wouldn't be surprised at all if DeMarcus Robinson gets a bigger chunk of that, and it all of a sudden could be a guy that's, doing good things for you and producing good fantasy stats. And again, you're talking about a guy you don't have to take until very late in the draft, so you're not investing any draft capital in him. But he knows the offense. He's been around the team. It could be very well be his year to take that next step.
Yeah, it's very much that's a best ball type of pick for me in the 21st round. He's the 95th wide receiver. I'm just looking for somebody that has a path for upside.
Right, exactly.
If Hardman's a rookie, Hill could be a suspension. Hardman is a rookie
and he's raw.
Yeah.
He's not ready for that role.
That's right. So I don't like the fact that Robinson effectively got drafted over by having Hardman drafted there this year. But again, we're looking for a role. Sammy Watkins, we're not sure exactly what he's going to be because we're never sure. Tyreek Hill has some questions, and you're talking about the most dynamic quarterback in the entire league, at least a year ago. So, yeah, I'll buy a piece of that Chiefs offense considering how little I paid for it. I also backed up Cooper Kupp with Josh Reynolds. We saw him having some success last year when Kupp was out. So, again, I'm buying a piece of a good offense.
Okay, folks, you're listening to the What the Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Jim Day. This is Mike Blewett. We're getting into it. We're talking about our Scott Fish Bowl teams and trying to break them down a little bit. You got Ertz. Tell us your thought processes about coming back and getting your second and third and who they were.
So it was Ertz at the turn along with Julio Jones. There was obviously an opportunity for me to go for Le'Veon Bell or Dalvin Cook, James Conner, Nick Chubb, even Todd Gurley, whom I know you got with your second pick of the draft and really the 14th pick overall, I guess it was. But I wanted Julio. I wanted the dynamic wide receiver, which I got with Julio. And T.Y. Hilton is who I got on all the way back. So I had to wait 24 picks between Julio or 22 picks between Julio and T.Y. Hilton. And I think I'm happy to have T.Y. Hilton there. He's put up numbers every time Andrew Luck's been healthy. So I'm happy to have him there again as my number 2 wide receiver. Between Julio and T.Y. Hilton and Cooper Kupp, it's a lot of catches right there. So I feel good about that top 3.
No doubt about it. I get you. I was looking for one of those tight ends, but Kelsey went at 105 in our league. And then I took it at Devontae Adams at the 111 thinking I would get one of the two tight ends at the 202, but of course the guy picking at 12 and 1
That's a gut
took
punch.
both of them. Yeah,
that's a gut punch. What happened to you?
Yeah, he took both of them. He definitely he left me reeling, and there's not many times I feel reeling in a draft.
The reality is, if you had passed on Adams, he takes Adams, right?
Right.
So, would you have taken Kittle over Ertz?
I probably would have. That was definitely the thing I was trying to go back and forth in my head. It's very tight for both of them. They both have a little bit of question marks in the fact of that Philadelphia is saying they want to get Dallas Goedert much more involved this year. And I love Goddard. I think he's going to be a star in this league eventually. But Ertz is the star now. But then with Kittle, you got a bunch of different wide receivers coming into the mix there. So it's going to be hard to see if he gets that many targets again. So I think they both have questions. I still think both of them are going to have great years. So on the fly, I was leaning a little bit Kittle over Ertz, thinking that I would go Kittle and then come back later in the draft and try and get Goddard. But he went a lot earlier than I thought he would too.
Yeah. So you end up with Adams and Gurley because Scott Bischoff goes Kittle and Ertz. That would have left me reeling too. I think in the position that you were in, I got to be honest, I would have taken the exact same guy. I probably would have taken Devontae Adams there instead of one of the tight ends. But it's easy to say now. It's hindsight's 2020. I'm just sort of looking as to what I would have done if Devontae Adams wasn't on the board for me, and I wasn't going to jump on Gurley necessarily. I can't really fault you with those two picks because you have guys that are going to get a tremendous amount of touches. Your depth chart, though, is Adams, Edelman, Robert Woods, and you got Larry Fitzgerald, too. That's pretty crazy that you waited from the 5th round to the 12th round before taking your next wide receiver, and you still got Larry Fitz. So I waited a while, too, to take Larry Fitz. So what's the deal? Why people are high on Kyler Murray but not on Larry Fitz? Explain that to me.
Because they're all loving the young guys. Everybody's buying into Christian Kirk and the other young receivers they brought in, and I kind of laugh at them people. Look, I like Kirk, and I think he's going to have a good year. I think he's definitely – we saw him make major strides last year, even in a bad offense. So I do like him this year. But you know what? If this offense is going to be this fast and doing all of these things, Fitzgerald is going to be highly involved right from the get-go in that offense. There's no way you don't have him involved. It's not like he's lost a step. I know he's getting older, but he's still in great shape. Heck, they said he came into camp this year in better shape than he was last year. So he's ready to play.
Every season that he's had capable quarterback play, he's been awesome. He has been. I know people have looked back through the years where he's had some low yards per catch numbers, and it isn't what it used to look like, but they're obviously going to be way better than they were last year. And to your point, if that offense is on the go and it improves greatly, he's going to be a part of it. He's a first down machine, which, by the way, does matter in this league, more so than any other league we're going to play in. And it allows him a lot more catches. In your draft, 47th wide receiver off the board. In my draft, 43rd. So considering that he's a wide receiver 4 for both of us and for a lot of people that drafted him throughout these drafts so far, you have to consider you're not going to find a safer wide receiver 4 than Larry Fitzgerald ever.
No, I agree. Absolutely, I agree. Some of the guys that went around him, Metcalf went right after him. John Brown went a little after him.
Jim, people have been trying to get out a year early on Larry Fitzgerald for 5 years.
Yeah, exactly right. Everybody wants to, and I get that. I tend to go the other way. I usually ride a guy 1 year too late. It's definitely one of my problems, especially guys that I really like Fitzgerald. I do have that tendency, but I don't think he's ready to go yet. I just don't think so. And this offense is going to be really good. I'm really.
They were terrible last year. Absolutely terrible by any measure offensively. His numbers were 69, 7, 34, and 6. That's in an absolute bottom of the barrel team, bottom of the barrel offense, ranking dead last in points and yards and first downs and passing yards and rushing yards. That's hard to do. Scoring percentage, drive time, all of it, dead last in the league. And he still ended up with 69, 7, 34, and 6 when everything was going wrong. So what if a few things go right? Could it be 80 for 900 and 8 touchdowns? as your fourth wide receiver, Jim.
I'm all over him. I got quite a few shares of him, and if this is the year that he falls off the edge of the planet, well, then I'll be sitting there holding on to his chain.
I'm with you. I'll take that risk every time. So, you got good depth at QB. Your wide receivers, we already talked about. You got Josh Gordon there, buddy.
Yeah, I had to take a flyer on Gordon. Look, I do like my receivers. We talked about Adams. My second one was Julian Edelman. Like him a lot. Third one was Robert Woods. I'm still a believer in Woods. And then Fitz is my fourth. But then after that, I went for guys that I think have some upside. And Dante Moncrief, because I do think he's going to win that number 2 job. I like David Moore. I got him really late. But, again, this is a guy that showed some rapport with Wilson last year. I think it's only going to get better this year. Jerron Brown, they've been talking him up as the slot guy in Seattle. So I took him really late as a, what the heck kind of guy. Josh Gordon, let's face it, who knows? We just don't know. But we did see him and Brady, their rapport getting better as the season started to move on last year before he left again. So, yeah, of course, you're taking a shot. Sometimes you just have to take a shot. The upside is just too high if he does play.
So what happened with you in this draft, because it could have gone south, but I like where it ended up, is that you waited on tight end until the 10th round, but you ended up with a nice duo because you took them in back-to-back rounds, which I think was smart. You took Rudolph and Jack Doyle. I'm surprised you didn't take your boy Dallas Goedert because he was sitting there, but we've also talked about Jack Doyle almost every week on this podcast. I think he's the official mascot of this podcast. So despite waiting, you have a pretty good tight end scenario, provided that Doyle comes back to be healthy. They say they're taking it along slow. I trust that he's going to be back in a part of the offense at some point, though.
Yeah, I think he'd be ready for week 1. Again, they're saying that a lot with these veteran guys now because, let's face it, I don't think we're going to see a lot of veterans in preseason this year. I think we're going to see less and less veterans actually stepping on the field in preseason, especially in week 3, which is supposed to be the big week where all the vets play. We saw last year half the vets sat out week 3, and none played week 4. So yeah. I think we're going to see a lot of that and even more this year than last year. Why put him out there to get injured? That's what everybody's thinking at this point. And we keep seeing guys get injured in those games, and they don't want to deal with it.
And honestly, I don't know what the NFL can do about that fact. You can't blame the teams at all. The NFL is trying to – they understand that the preseason games don't really work. It gets people, injects a little juice into people like us that are – following it or into it, but at the same time, the games are mostly unwatchable. You're watching the second halves of any of those games, and none of those guys are going to make the team.
Yeah.
So how excited can you get when most of the players' names, unfortunately, become forgettable just 2 weeks later? So I'm not in favor of expanding to the 18-game season, but I can understand what the NFL just gets to a point where they say these preseason games are totally pointless. Let's give people more actual football. I understand that argument, even though I'm against the 18-game season.
Well, part of me is against the 18-game season. The other part of me says, well, the logistics of it, the strategy that would have to come into it would definitely add a layer to the game. There's no doubt about it. All of a sudden, coaches have to go through their schedule and say, okay, well, I think this game, we should have a little easier time in this game. So maybe this is the game we sit Brady. One of the two he has to sit.
Oh, that would be crazy. I'm definitely not a supporter of that, of the 18-game schedule with the 16-game max. I think that would destroy us from a fantasy football playing standpoint. You'd have to just come up with huge rosters, or what would happen? You'd probably move to team quarterback in a lot of leagues.
Oh, I don't want to do that. No, I think if they end up doing that, they're going to end up having to do it to a point where they say, okay, we need to know by Wednesday which guys aren't playing this week, because they're going to have to do that for Vegas anyway. Vegas is absolutely going to want to know who's not playing this week before they put those lines out.
Yeah, Vegas. Well, it probably throws so much variance into the Vegas lines. I don't even know what their thoughts may be. They may be feeling, well, nobody can get an edge now because they're not going to be familiar with the depth charts. So let's just go along with the NFL. At the same time, they might say, well, people are going to be less likely to bet. I'd be really curious what Vegas's thoughts are on it. But for them, it's probably more football is better for them.
Oh yeah, more games, absolutely. They definitely get more bets, more money in their pockets. There's no doubt about that. As long as they can keep up with the trend and make those right calls. Again, Vegas doesn't care which side wins. You know that. I know you know that.
Sure.
They're all they want to do is make sure they have money on both sides,
Yeah, of
so
course.
that they can take the top off each side, and they're happy with that.
Yeah.
So as long as they can continue to do that, they'll be fine. If they can't do that, then I would wonder if they would have enough pull to get it taken out if they tried to do it. Maybe they try to do it on a 1-year trial basis, and Vegas at the end of the year says, yeah, this didn't work for us. I wonder if they'd have enough pull to actually get something like that taken away.
I don't think so. I think it's going to
a lot of money tied up to Vegas in the NFL right now.
Just because this has to be negotiated as part of the CBA, and it'll probably be a 6, 7, 8 year long.
Yeah, that's CBA. A good point.
They wouldn't be able to roll it back. I think it doesn't happen. I think the PA has shown that they are against the thought, and as we talked about on this podcast or maybe elsewhere, it could be a negotiating ploy. They could get to the point where they say, all right, we'll go to 18 games, but you have to give this revenue back, or you have to expand rosters, whatever you have to do. Because the NFLPA is obviously in favor of expanded rosters, right? It's more players.
Right, more players,
more
absolutely,
revenue, more revenue to the players overall and whatever. So I think that's a possibility. I just think right now, if I had to guess, I'd say it's not in the new CBA, but we shall see, because clearly these preseason games have lost just about all the juice. And to what you said earlier, I see less and less players, starters, playing in these games year over year. It's already happened, and I think it's really going to ratchet up. The NBA, to some extent, has really set the tone for load management and understanding. Like, it doesn't really matter what these players' stats are. Yes, performance bonuses play a role, but we're just trying to be healthy in December, in January. That is the main goal. We're good enough. What's different, obviously, is that it's only 16 games. You can't punt games in the NFL, right? You're jockeying for home field advantage in each and every week. But I do think load management for certain players is going to be practiced. We've seen it as running back by committee really is what's impacted the fantasy community. I think you could potentially see that for players overall. Can I ask you a question about one player on your fishbowl roster? Because we haven't talked about him much on here. And I think he gets short shrift when you're talking about the Chicago Bears offense, and that's Mike Davis. He obviously moves over there in the offseason. They move on from Jordan Howard. I'm curious how you think he moves into the Jordan Howard role completely. Do you see a diminished role for him in what was the Jordan Howard mold? Just give me a couple of minutes on Mike Davis.
Well, actually, no. I think David Montgomery's going to take over most of that role. But the problem is, when you're talking rookies, there's so many things that come into it. He's a good, well-rounded running back, Montgomery is.
Yeah.
So I think he can handle that road, do a little bit of everything. But Davis showed last year that he can play in this league too. He had a couple of really good games with Seattle. He can do a little bit of everything himself, run inside, he can run outside, he can catch the ball, he can pass protect. So I think at some point he's going to either have a decent enough role, or Montgomery's going to make some mistakes and they feel they have to make a change, until Montgomery gets back into the fold and he gets a bigger playing time. This was a late gamble based on the fact that I was, like you always talk about, you want players that have a path, have upside. And to me, his upside is David Montgomery going down or, fumbling the ball a few times early on and not being able to protect his quarterback. If any of that comes into play in the preseason and training camp, then we could see Davis having a bigger role. Yeah. And that's really all I did because, again, like your team, my running backs are probably the weakest part of my team.
Yeah.
I wanted guys that have that chance to get there.
Yeah, like anytime a guy like Matt Nagy is drafting David Montgomery, I think there's obviously a specific reason that he's doing that. So from that standpoint, I think it's important to note that Montgomery will be the starter. That being said, Jordan Howard in a role where they didn't even really seem to like him and moved on from him, moved him to Philly, he still had a 250 carry, 935 yard, 9 touchdown season. So imagining Davis even in that role for say 8 games or so, or 6 games, I think he has value for a team that's built like this.
No, I absolutely agree. I like Davis. He's one of those guys that's been a forgotten man. Most people aren't really even looking his way because of the addition of Montgomery. But again, we've seen too many talented rookie running backs not get on the field for too many reasons to think that, they're guaranteed. Like, same thing could be said for Josh Jacobs. Everybody's expecting him to be the bell cow in Oakland now, and he more than likely will. But there's still a lot of things that can happen in camp and in preseason that could preclude that. And that's another reason why I went for Doug Martin later on. Nobody realizes, but Doug Martin, when Lynch went down last year, Doug Martin actually played pretty well for them. He had a nice stretch of games from week 10 through week 14, I think. Actually, even week 16, he had a great game against the Broncos, 107 yards and a touchdown. Hey, again, it's trying to take those guys really late in the draft that maybe have a chance at some point to sneak into that starting lineup. And that's what you're looking for at that point. Otherwise, it really doesn't make sense to grab backups just for backups if you don't think they could ever get to the point where they could be the lead back.
And sometimes this stuff doesn't even make sense. Nick Chubb, we saw for the first 6 games of the year, barely touched the ball, and then he exploded onto the scene.
Literally, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns on 3 carries.
He had the 3 for 105 and 2 touchdowns, and still the next week, Hugh Jackson is like, let's just let him touch the ball 3 times. And again, let him touch it 3 times until finally week 7 against Tampa, 18 carries, and he's off to the races. So, like you said, there are a variety of different factors that can come into play. Everybody felt really good about Barkley last year, and we were right. I thought it was easy to predict that, but not so easy.
Barkley was on a totally different level than any of these running backs in this year's class.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, these guys have chances, and that's what really is getting them drafted, is the opportunity they get. But none of the guys in this draft class were thought of as being, that next level talent at all.
Yeah, and not having a role like that. There was nobody else that you could possibly have put in even a complimentary role on the Giants last year. He was the entire offense. You're a Giants fan. I'm here in New York. We knew going in that the team was going to be pretty rough and that Barkley was going to end up being a big part of the offense because the offensive line wasn't very good. They weren't going to have a vertical passing game. Even with Odell on the team, it wasn't going to be a situation where Eli was going to be able to have this vertical passing game that was going to move the chains consistently. Barkley was their best chance, and that ended up being what happened, even if it wasn't always pretty.
No, there were a lot of times it wasn't pretty, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But, hey, look, Barkley is definitely that next level talent. There's no doubt about it. He is a generational talent, like Zeke is, guys like that. They just take it to a whole new level. And just the amount of different things he did last year. He had the most broken tackles as a receiver in the league by a good amount. I think he had 23 broken tackles as a receiver, and the next highest was, I think, George Kittle at 14.
Well, Eli also threw him the ball in that Falcons game, like behind the line of scrimmage, like 12 times. He had no choice but to break tackles. The 14-catch game, probably, if I remember correctly, didn't go for much yardage at all, and I would say 10 behind the line of scrimmage. So he was up a creek without a paddle for sure. One other guy I want to ask you about, speaking of like aging veterans who I'm a fan of, is Gio Bernard. I know it's really late, and I know in our 16-team leagues, we're 12-team, 16-round leagues, we're not going to see a lot of him. But I think we expect the Bengals to go the route of Joe Mixon quite a bit, which, if we're getting into the 300 touch range, Jim, it's going to open the risk of injury. And I'm just curious, does Gio Bernard have any kind of complimentary role from the start? And what happens if Mixon goes down?
Well, they have been talking about giving Bernard a little bit of a role from the start, even with Mixon there, trying to keep Mixon healthy longer, not take as many hits as he's been taking. So they've been talking about that. But then again, if Mixon does go down, Bernard is absolutely the next guy up. He's the guy who's going to get those chances. And again, when you start off with running backs that aren't the strongest part of your team, those are the guys you have to look for. You have to look for guys that have a clear chance of becoming a starter. And literally, it's one hit away with any running back. The next guy gets to start. So you just have to keep that in mind and take a few of those guys in that realm. I did the same thing with C.J. Anderson if Kerryon Johnson gets hurt again. You're looking at a pretty run-heavy offense in Detroit. if Kerryon goes down, C.J. Anderson showed very well last year that he's still ready to go no matter how much extra weight he had on. He was ready to go. Now, of course, that offensive line gave him huge holes to run through, and that's fine. But he still showed he can make some of his plays on his own. And if Kerryon goes down, then I think he's another guy who might have that shot. And, that definitely was the whole purpose of my running back group as the draft went on, was trying to grab guys that are one play away from becoming a starter.
We should end the podcast or land the plane on a positive note. And according to Pro Football Talk, and this is reported that Titans offensive coordinator Arthur Smith intends to ride Derrick Henry this season. So how do you know when a coach is lying, Jim? When his lips are moving. So you can only trust so much. But it appears that there's at least some that Derrick Henry is going to get a ton of carries this season. I actually think the team is built with that offensive line to run the ball quite a bit. Now they do have some receiver talent, and they have a very high draft capital quarterback in Mariota, who I'm still a believer in. But I just think that Derrick Henry, even though he may not be part of the passing game at all, I think there's a real chance for him to really see a ton of carries this year, finally.
I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. I like Derrick Henry this year. I've been grabbing him quite often. And look, it is what it is. Like you said, he's not going to be much involved in the passing game at all. I think he had, 15 catches all last year.
Mm-hmm.
But he did have 250 carries, and that was with a very, very light start to his carry early in the season when everybody figured that it was going to be Dion Lewis who was going to get a lot of work, and it just wasn't working out for Dion Lewis either.
So Henry had 5 games in the month of December, 97 carries, 625 yards, 8 touchdowns, the most productive month for anybody really in the NFL last year in the month of December. So I understand that it was very heavily piled up on the Jaguars in that 238-yard game, and then the 170 against the Giants, but it was the yards were the most by any NFL player in any month last year. So it was 5 games. There was 2 huge ones, but that's what stats are for. I get to prove my argument.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I don't care if it was 2 huge ones or 4 mediocre ones. As long as the numbers got there, that's what you need. It took that long for them to realize that he's that kind of back who gets better as the game goes on. As you give him more carries, he wears down defenses, and then he can take it to the house. And I think we're going to absolutely see more of that this year.
Cool.
So that basically does it for us, folks. We are, of course, the What the Fantasy Football Show. I am Jim Day. This is Mike Blewett. Mike, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, find me on Twitter at Mike Blewett, BLEWITT. I'm on Fantasy Sports Radio Network on the weekends, FNTSY Radio, so you can hear me there. You'll hear me more as the NFL season rolls towards the commencing of the NFL season. You'll hear me more, and I'll be on with Jim on various shows, and certainly right here every Wednesday on the What the podcast.
I, of course, am also on the FNTSY on the video side every Monday through Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern time. We have the Fantasy Football Frenzy. Chris Ventura, George Kurtz, and I just hashing out all the league. Every day we're doing a different team fantasy preview for the season. So come on out and check us out at FNTSY Sports Network. Also, of course, over at FF Champs, we got our draft kit live now. We're adding all of our podcasts right to the page over there. We have so much going on with our draft kit. It isn't funny. Of course, Bill Enright, one of the owners of the site, came in 5th overall in the Fantasy Pros preseason rankings last year. So that was, great job by him. Got a lot of things going on. And, of course, I did forget to mention this at the top of the show, of course, but the WTF Fantasy Football Show is a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network, now at 18 podcasts strong and still growing. So we just recently added 2 more podcasts, one for IDP and one for Superflex/Dynasty. So we got a little bit of everything covered with all our podcasts. So if you get a chance, come take a listen to us. You can now listen to us directly on the FF Champ site. You can listen to us directly on the Full-Time Fantasy site. And you can always follow our tweets on Twitter using the hashtag FTFPodNet. So, folks, that'll be it, WTF show for this week. We will see you next week. Hopefully, Tony will join us as he gets back into the country, hopefully with no skin diseases or communicable diseases when he gets back from Turkey. So, folks, that's it for us. We will talk to you next week. Good night.